Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you. It's always a pleasure to be with you each Sunday, and today is no different. As Diane mentioned, we recognize that it's a rainy day, and so we appreciate the commitment that you made to join us this morning. I hope your summers have been going exactly how you intended for it to go. If not, you have a couple of weeks to make a switch. I'm talking to myself. And so if you're in my boat, let's make the last few weeks of summer count. Today, as you can see based on the video that we just showed, we are continuing our August sermon series entitled Road Trip. And just as summer is a season when many of us go on physical road trips to visit places that fill us with life and rejuvenate us, on a spiritual level, our hope in this series is that as we are traveling through the scriptures, exploring how God meets people along the journeys within the scriptures, that we will also encounter truths that will help us to experience life and rejuvenation. Last week, Pastor Diane kicked off this sermon series with a powerful and insightful message that encouraged us to courageously just take the next step. And she did this by looking at a defining moment in the life of Abraham, as told in the book of Genesis. In today's message, we are focusing on detours and dead ends that we encounter in our journeys. I would be surprised if I polled the room right now if any of you enjoyed experiencing detours and dead ends. If that was the case, I must confess I would find that to be quite weird, but some people are into things that I may not be into. But the reality is detours and dead ends are unavoidable in our lives. Recognizing this, I invite you to pray with me as we seek to learn more about how we should understand our detours and dead ends by looking at the scriptures. Jesus, we thank you for your presence, and we thank you for your word. And I pray right now that the reality that life is not free of challenges will help us to see through your word how you want to use those challenges to shape us and to form us into being made more like you. God, I recognize that people in the room right now may be experiencing a detour or a dead end in their own lives that has been challenging for them. And I pray that out of your abundance of love for us, that you will meet them through this message at their point of need. We ask that you will move as you see fit. In Jesus' name, amen. Since moving to BC, my wife Marissa and I have taken almost yearly trips to Victoria. We just love Victoria and we love Vancouver Island. I must confess that unless Caius chooses to live somewhere else in the future, I plan to retire on Vancouver Island if I can. People might guess I'd want to retire in Antigua, but I need to have some of the North American amenities plus the island life to be blended into one. And so Vancouver Island is the perfect place for that. We enjoy the food there. We also enjoy walking along the beach. And forgive me for saying this, even though they may not be as beautiful as the beaches that I grew up with, they are still quite lovely. You guys can laugh at that, it's a joke. Your beaches are nice too. And we just have so many wonderful memories of visiting Victoria and Vancouver Island. And throughout all the times we have made trips there, there's only one time I can remember having a negative experience. It happened during our first trip to Victoria, and we had a full schedule of activities that we wanted to do while we were there, and one of the items on the itinerary that we were most looking forward to was taking a drive along a loop that would allow us to see multiple must-see spots on the island. On the day that we were going on this much-anticipated drive, which was supposed to take 4 hours, we thought, Marissa asked me, "Hey, Prince, you sure you have loaded the right loop into the GPS?" To which I responded, "Of course I did." I'm like, I don't make that type of mistakes with directions. So I thought. And at the beginning of our trip and the journey, everything was going smoothly. We got to Souk and we saw the potholes, and then we drove to the beautiful Jordan River. And as you'd imagine, as a pastor, I was making a bunch of jokes about going to the Jordan to meet Jesus because I was a Bible corny guy at the time, and still am. And so Marissa and I were making jokes back and forth in that way. Following that stop, we headed to Port Renfrew for lunch, and after leaving the restaurant to continue our journey to Lake Cowichan, things took an interesting turn. A short while into that part of our trip, we lost cell phone service. We saw signs that said that the next service station would be hundreds of kilometers away, and our GPS signal began to fluctuate. And while all of these things were happening, I kept on saying to Marissa, it's a loop. We just have to keep driving it and we'll be fine. Loop means circle, all right? So we'll be fine. However, I must admit that I was incredibly nervous inside. My anxiety grew even more heightened when we came across a sign that appeared to have bullet holes in it. So I was like, oh, Jesus, where I am. I'm not used to this stuff, man. And I was literally thinking to myself, just please get us back to the Airbnb. That 1 hour and 15-minute drive from Port Renfrew to the lake felt like it lasted an eternity. And so when we finally saw a sign that said, Victoria, this way, we just decided to go to the nearest gas station, and we skipped out on all the other stops that we were planning to go through because we just didn't want to risk it. When we finally got back to the Airbnb, I said, you know what, let me check the map to find out what went wrong because, again, the trip was only supposed to last 4 hours. It was at that time that I discovered that I took us on an unexpected detour by driving along the Pacific Marine Circle route, which is approximately 289 kilometers long, rather than our planned route of the Mount Douglas Loop, which is 45 kilometers long, which you can take via a scooter. And so I made a big snafu, and Marissa was none too pleased. Chances are, I'm sure, you have your own stories of when you took an unplanned turn that led you on a detour via a route that you weren't expecting to take. Just like the detours as well, you probably have been on a situation or in a scenario where you encountered a dead end at some point because you were going along the roads and you realized that you met at the end of a cul-de-sac or something, especially when we see all the construction that is happening around us. Our experiences with roundabout paths and impasses happen not only literally in our lives, but we all know that they occur figuratively and spiritually as well. Perhaps today you're facing challenges right now that you would describe as a detour in your career. Maybe a recent health diagnosis has altered the course in which you describe your life or which you envision your life would ever function. Perhaps a relationship that means the world to you is currently in a season that seems to be hopeless, like a dead end with no visible path. Maybe it's the relationship with your spouse or your children or a parent. Recognizing that these issues are significant to us, for the remainder of our time today, we're going to focus our attention on a well-known detour and dead-end travel story that is found in the scriptures. And the story I am referring to is the account that we read about in chapters 13 and 14 of Exodus, which informs us about the trip that the people of Israel took after they initially left Egypt to make their way to the land that God had promised them. Before the Israelites reached this particular detour or dead end that we are looking at, we need to remember, or we need to have an awareness about the significant obstacle that they were facing before this happened. As many of you know, they were enslaved in Egypt. In the book of Genesis, God prophesied to his servant Abraham that his descendants would live in a foreign land for 400 years, and eventually they would be enslaved there. But he also promised to deliver them. He said in Genesis chapter 15, verse 14, "But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth." God's prophecy was fulfilled when Abraham's grandson, Jacob, moved with his family to Egypt to escape a famine that was in the land that they resided in. They chose Egypt because Jacob's son, one of his sons, became a high-ranking official in the Egyptian government because God's favor was upon his life, and also the Pharaoh at the time looked upon Joseph favorably. And Joseph, even though he experienced his own journey with slavery, he was risen to high heights because of God. Many years after Joseph died, a new Pharaoh came to power in Egypt, who oppressed the Israelites, and he enslaved them for many years. And as time progressed, many years, centuries passed, during the years following the birth of Moses, who we would probably describe as one of the central figures within the Old Testament, maybe outside of God, the most central figure within the Old Testament. And at the time that he was born, God essentially said that I am ready to deliver my people, because he heard the cries of his people and he was prepared to free them from the slavery that they were enduring. And to carry out his redemptive plan, God told Moses, hey, I'm going to send you as my servant, and I want you to stand before Pharaoh and request that he let my people go so that they could worship me. And as you likely know, Pharaoh refused because over and over again, God hardened his heart. And he said, I'm not letting the people go. And in fact, there were times when he increased the level of pressure and intensity with the work that they had to do while enslaved, because Moses was hoping to see them released. But God then introduced a series of plagues, as you know. And in each series of the plagues, or in each cycle, Moses requested that Pharaoh release God's people. Pharaoh refused. God sent the plague. Pharaoh relented. God removed the plague. And then the cycle repeated itself after Pharaoh ignored what happened earlier and decided, hey, I'm going to do what I want anyway. And when we get to the 10th and final plague, the death of the firstborn sons and livestock in Egypt, Pharaoh finally agreed to let the children of Israel go. It is at this point in the narrative that we are told that the Israelites were divinely led on a detour that would result in a dead end, as mentioned in verse 17 of Exodus chapter 13. This is what the verse says. When Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. What is interesting to note from this passage or this verse is that God in his wisdom guided the Israelites along a lengthy route to their destination, the promised land, which is the land of Canaan. So this helps us to understand that sometimes the detours and the dead ends that we encounter in our life may be as a result of God's supernatural influence. While most of the times the spiritual, figurative, and physical challenges that we face are typically attributable to us or other human beings being at work within our lives, there are times when we navigate issues that are described as divinely orchestrated. In the case of the Israelites, after God delivered them and saved them from Egyptian slavery, they immediately faced a God-ordained road trip challenge. For those of us who are believers, after we have experienced salvation in Jesus from sin and death through the grace of Jesus and our faith in him, we know that there are issues that appear in our journeys that are outside of our control from time to time. And we cannot label it as being attributable to another person or to natural means. Considering this, how do we make sense of this? How do we make sense of the detours and the dead ends in our lives that seem to be as a result of divine influence? Especially in an age that says in certain aspects of Christianity that, hey, God desires us to experience nothing but the bed of roses along our journeys. And especially when people make arguments that say, hey, if God is calling me to experience hardships in life, I want nothing to do with Christianity. So how do we make sense of it? I believe the Exodus account offers insight into how we can make sense of this common reality. So today we will examine the Israelites and their experience to gain a deeper understanding of what we can do or how we can interpret the God-ordained or orchestrated detours and dead ends that come our way. As we examine the situation that they face, we'll focus on reasons for God-influenced detours and dead ends. We will look at common human reactions to detours and dead ends. And we will also talk about the hoped result that we have when we experience detours and dead ends. So in saying that, the first of the two reasons of detours and dead ends that we're going to be looking at of this nature this morning is that God uses them to form us, especially for what may lie ahead in our lives. In verses 17 and 18 of Exodus 13, we are told, when Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road that runs through Philistine territory, even though that was the shortest route to the promised land. God said if the people are faced with a battle, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led them in a roundabout way through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Thus the Israelites left Egypt like an army ready for battle. While we might think to ourselves that the Israelites should be fully prepared at this time for anything that came their way because of all the things that God had done to bring them out of captivity, apparently they were not. After seeing all of the plagues, after seeing God move through the first Passover to protect them by the blood covering being outside of their doors, they still apparently weren't ready for certain challenges of a military nature. So out of a concern for them and their state of resilience at the time, God guided them away from the most direct path to the promised land to a detour-like route. From a strictly geographical perspective, the most ideal route that you can see based on the map for the Israelites to get from Egypt to Canaan would have been via the Mediterranean coast, far away from where the Red Sea is located. However, the route that the Israelites were guided on by God was literally going to be the clearest route because the shortest route was littered with fortresses and garrisons of armies for foreign nations. And so if they went that way, they would have encountered situations that would have resulted in them encountering a battle that they may not have been prepared for. In saying that, when I imagine myself in the shoes of the Israelites, I wonder how they received God's directional instructions when they first received them. I wonder if they thought to themselves, why is God, through Moses, sending us on a detour that they likely do not have insight into the reason why, which keeps them from being enslaved longer? Why did God choose a roundabout way? Building on this thought, I wonder how many of us in the room today are frustrated with God and life because we hope that something will work out, but it's taken longer than we expected. We've been praying over and over and over again for something, and for whatever reason, it is not being answered. Despite doing everything necessary to move things forward, the journey seems to be never ending, and the obstacles keep appearing, so we find ourselves thinking, why is God doing nothing to resolve our situation? Suppose you're wrestling with questions like this or thoughts like this today, or you do from time to time. I want to invite you to remember and to consider God's unconditional love for you. Remember that God only seeks our good. Because of this, he's aware of what we can truly handle. He may be working graciously through our situation to help shape us and prepare us for what lies ahead on the predetermined destination that we want to get to, but is not always evident to us. While the delays in him bringing resolution might be infuriating, if we experience particular challenges at the wrong time, the truth is facing those things threaten to rob us of the faith that God has deposited within us. We could experience deep pain and hardships if we face things before we are ready for them. So the detours and dead ends we encounter, which seem attributable to God, come from a place of love and care for our well-being. At first glance, these complications from our perspective might appear to be evidence that God is uninvolved or uninterested in bringing peace to our lives, when the reality might be he's preventing us from returning to sources that threaten to hold us captive. Just like the best way to prevent injury from learning to ride a bicycle, this is not the way I learned because I learned from falling, but the best way usually involves getting on a balance bike first and then moving on to a tricycle and then learning to ride with training wheels and then riding a regular bicycle. The best way to meet future challenges is to experience growth in the issues that we are currently facing. The best way to experience growth is to endure now so that when you encounter something else in the future, you are ready for it. God recognizes this. In our microwave society, we like to accelerate past certain things, and we believe that God should move things faster than he potentially wants to. And sometimes the delay happens because we are just not ready for what might come next. The second reason we are looking at today is that detours and dead ends reveal God to us. This point emerges from Exodus chapter 14, verses 1 to 4, which says, "Then the Lord gave these instructions to Moses. Order the Israelites to turn back and camp by Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. Camp there along the shore across from Baal-zephon. Then Pharaoh will think the Israelites are confused. They are trapped in the wilderness. And once again, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after you. I have planned this in order to display my glory through Pharaoh and his whole army. After this, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So the Israelites camped there as they were told. From this passage, we learn that God directed the people of Israel to circle back to a location to camp at a site where Pharaoh and his troops would find them after Pharaoh changed his mind, so he decided that we're going to chase after them to get them back into captivity. The purpose of God sending the Israelites on this detour was to make it clear to Pharaoh who God was and is. He wanted to make it abundantly clear that I am the Lord thy God, I am all-powerful, I possess all glory. One might assume that Pharaoh and the nation of Egypt would have been familiar with God's nature and glory already, especially after the plagues that were inflicted upon them, but apparently they weren't. This helps you and I to internalize that delays and roadblocks that arise in our lives may serve the purpose of revealing God's nature in greater measure to us or to someone we may be connected to. Very few scenarios in life help us to grow in our knowledge and awareness of God's nature and character, like observing him resolve problems in ways that are only attributable to him. For the Israelites, we have to remember that one of the ill effects of being enslaved for centuries is that captives are believed to become mentally dependent upon their masters for their source of provision. When people go through slavery, that is one of the things that happens to them. Over time, they begin to believe that their sources of pain is also their sources of provision. And this forms a dependency that has the potential to distort perception, creating a complicated mix of resentment and reluctant resilience. And God, who knows everything, knew how the people of Israel were impacted by the captivity that they experienced in Egypt. And so he likely used the detour and the dead end to help the Israelites to see an opportunity come before them, to see the sources of their oppression be defeated. He wanted the people to have an awareness of his revelation and his power to defeat the things that would come their way that would seek to destroy them. Just like they faced 400 years of oppression and he defeated the Egyptians, he wanted them to have an awareness that was deeply embedded within them of who he is, of what he can do, and revealing his power and his glory. In our situation as well, when the challenging realities come our way that are divinely orchestrated, God may be potentially attempting to help us to grow in our awareness of him. In light of this, a question I want to ask you is, what might God want to reveal about himself to you today through the detours and dead ends that may be in your lives? What does God want to reveal about himself to you through the detours and dead ends that are presently in your lives? As you think about your response to this question, I want to invite you to reflect on these words attributed to Joni Eareckson Tada, a well-known Christian author and philanthropist who developed a form of quadriplegia from a diving accident that took place when she was 17 years old. This is what she wrote. When life is hard, it's easy to focus on the pain. But God is more interested in refining your faith and revealing his character than in relieving your discomfort. It might sound like stinging words, but it's coming from someone who experienced a great measure of suffering herself. So rather than viewing the dead ends and the detours as just a source of frustration, what if it's a means for God to reveal his nature and his character to you, to grow your faith and to shape you to be more like Jesus? I hope that our recognition that God may use the difficulties that come our way to form us and reveal himself to us will influence how we react and respond to detours when they come our way in the future. In the case of the Israelites, when they realized that Pharaoh changed his mind, the reaction they displayed is similar to how most people would respond. How would you respond if you faced a situation where in front of you was a body of water believed to be the Red Sea, and coming behind of you was a great army that was seeking to destroy you? You likely would cry out for help. You likely would also engage in a season of complaining to the person who brought you there. And some of you may show confidence. This is exactly what the people of Israel did. We learn about this in these verses. As Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, 'Leave us alone, let us be slaves to the Egyptians. It is better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness.'" Nothing about their reaction should surprise us. And I believe if we're being fully transparent, nothing about their reaction, I believe, should cause us to judge them. Because when we face complex situations in our lives that are outside of our control, we usually respond by doing what? People who normally don't pray begin to pray exorbitantly and with great devotion. People who may not normally cry out begin to cry out to God. On that trip that Marissa and I took that I told you about early on, I was crying out internally, "God, please, I don't want to get lost here." And I can assure you that Marissa was also complaining a lot. And she had every right to, but she complained quite a bit. And I'm sure on the detours and the dead ends that you face in your life from time to time, you begin to cry. You begin to say, "God, where are you in the midst of this?" You begin to pray. And you also begin to complain because, after all, you're a human being. And these are some of the common reactions that we have to these dead ends. But there was a person who responded differently, and it was the person of Moses. And we want to pay attention to the fact that he showed confidence. Exodus 14 tells us, "Moses answered the people, and he said, 'Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still.'" Moses, as a wise and great leader, recognized that his people were overcome by fear. And so he decided that, hey, I'm going to stir up some confidence within them. And what's amazing is that up to this point in their early journey from Egypt to Canaan, all Moses had to rely upon was God saying, "I'm going to do this, and I'm going to show you and show the Israelites and show the Egyptians my power and my glory. So Moses essentially was relying upon the word that God promised him, and he also had the recollection of the things that he saw God do in the first few books of Exodus to inform his perspective. And if we were to assess those things together, we can conclude that Moses had confidence because he trusted God's word and he remembered what God had done for him in the past. And the same applies to you and I. When the detours and dead ends emerge in our lives, the way in which we respond with confidence, in boldness, in trust, and in faith is to have a strong awareness of what God's word says, the promises he makes towards us. And we also need to consider God's proof of performance. We need to remember his track record, the ways in which he has come through for us in the past. Each and every one of us likely can recall a situation that you encountered where it was unexplainable other than God responding to be at work in your circumstance. And things like that should do nothing else but fill you with faith. Fill you with boldness. Fill you with confidence to know that your God is working on your behalf, and what might appear to be a detour or a dead end is nothing for him. It's just an opportunity for his glory to be revealed. We all have those experiences. For me, distinctly remember a few years ago that Marissa and I applied for our permanent residency. And it was getting down to 7 days before our work permits at that time were going to expire. And we began to pray. God, I already spent close to $6,000 on this process. I don't want to spend any more money. And I really need you to move in a way that shows your faithfulness to us. That morning, I remember it like it was yesterday, it was a Thursday morning, we got the email that says, permanent residency approved. Now, there have been other times when I've prayed and he hasn't responded in that immediate nature. But that experience helped me in such a powerful way to know that this is who my God is. And the scriptures also reinforce that. And so that experience allows me to face dead ends and detours, and I have some that I'm thinking about today as I'm preaching to you, with a measure of confidence and hope in knowing that he can respond, he can act, and it's just a matter of time. That's how we build boldness that Moses demonstrated. And for the people of Israel, after Moses demonstrated this boldness by encouraging them, hey, have confidence in God. Do not be shaken. Do not be afraid. Stand still. God responded. He told the people, move towards the sea. And as he told them to move towards the sea, he gave Moses instructions on how he would go about rescuing his people. He told Moses to point your rod and your hands towards the sea. And as he did that, Moses would see that the sea would split, and then the people would be able to make their way across on dry ground. And just as God said it would happen, it did. As Moses stretched out his hand, the sea split open, and the people of Israel made their way across. Following that, God told Moses that the Egyptians would chase after you and your people. They're going to pursue you. But don't worry, I have a plan. And as they made their way to the other side, God told Moses once again, hey, stretch out your hands, lift up your rod, and see what I do. And at that time, the sea that was split became one again. And I know it sounds like a tragic story, but the Egyptians were defeated in that moment. Every last one of them. The people and the forces that chose to go against God and his people, who made a mock of him for centuries, were proven to be no match for him. And the greatest demonstration where we see God utilizing the dead end. Remember, the Red Sea was the dead end. He used the dead end to carry out his plan. The greatest demonstration that we see of that in the scriptures is when we reflect upon the gospel. We must remember that the people of Israel, the Jewish people, anticipated that their Messiah would be an individual who would come to conquer Rome because they were under Roman occupation at the time, and they thought they was going to establish a new kingdom that would be earthly. But Jesus came as a humble servant. And in that humble nature, he also chose a humble path through a dead end that appeared in the form of the cross. That source and symbol of shame and debt is what he chose to defeat the things that oppress God's people, and all people for that matter, which is sin and death. And so through Jesus, we learn that anything that comes our way that may be perceived to be a dead end or a detour has the potential to be used by God as the very means and source where we find our freedom. The Red Sea was considered the source that would either drown the people of Israel or they would have to retreat back to Egypt. For Jesus, the cross would be viewed as the place of finality where no one would survive and he would be facing death for eternity. But we know that the scriptures reveal to us through the Gospels that he defeated sin, death, and the grave. Through the cross that he hung on, and through his death and through his resurrection, the thing that was meant to be a source of captivity became a source of freedom. So, what does that mean for you and me today? If there are things that are in our lives that we may consider to be dead ends or detours, that have been holding us captive, God has the power to utilize that thing in such a way to bring about your desired outcome. You just have to keep trusting him. Don't lose faith and hope. If you're experiencing challenges in your marriage right now, and you know that you had a sense that God directed you into that marriage, and God will never give you the go-ahead to be released from that marriage unless things happen that violate his instructions in the scripture, and you want to throw in the towel, I implore you not to. If you are in a situation where you're finding it difficult to show love to your children or to your parents because life is challenging and you know that God blessed you with them, so it was ordained by him, don't give up on the relationship. If you feel as though your health is beyond repair and God cannot redeem you, there's so many countless healing stories that we can reference that he can break into that situation to bring glory to his name. So do not give up. Whatever the perceived detour or dead end may be, he has the power to use that to free you. So, as we prepare to pray this morning and come to the table, if you are in the room today or you're online and you have a sense that, you know what, this last season has been a challenging one, and I feel as though I just want to throw in the towel, and you are longing for God to show himself in your situation, I invite you to bring that request before him today. If you're here today and you're telling yourself, you know what, I can think of what this detour is and I can think of the dead end, but the reality is I can't see a way through. I pray that God will reveal himself to you in such a way this morning that your confidence in him will not be shaken. Perhaps you're here this morning and you're praying for somebody else. God may choose to answer that prayer as well too. And I want to remind you that after we come to the Lord's table, we will have prayer team members here at the front, as well as by the cross, who would love nothing more than to bring your personalized request about the detours and the dead ends that you're facing to God to see how he may use his power to redeem them. I invite you to pray with me. God, it's amazing how you are able to utilize those things and those means that were set up to bring harm or be a source of frustration to bring redemption. And Jesus, you know where each person in this room today is, and you know the challenges that they may be encountering in their journeys. And I pray right now, dear God, that if your goal right today and in this season is to bring formation to them to help them be prepared for what is to come, that they will be filled with a spirit-led perspective on this time. If your desire, Jesus, is to reveal more of yourself in a manner that will deepen our hope and trust in you, I ask, dear God, that you will move in that way in each life here today. And Jesus, if your desire is for your people to respond with boldness that will demonstrate to all around us that our faith in you is not futile, it is not dead, but it is alive and well, and it is active, I pray that you will move in that way. And I also ask, dear Jesus, that just as you utilize the cross, the ultimate source of a dead end, just as you utilize a humble path, which would have been perceived as a detour, to bring about your glory, utilize whatever you feel fit in our lives that may be perceived as illogical in our perspectives to bring healing and restoration to people in this room today. We know you can do it. You did it for the Israelites. You did it for all of humanity in your blood and in your sacrifice. And you can do it for us in this age. So we put our hope, our trust in you. Amen.